The first thing you feel is the silence. Then the frost bites through your thin animal hide and settles deep into your marrow. For our ancestors, winter wasn't just a season. It was a cold-blooded executioner waiting for a single mistake. 300,000 years ago, humans were not the masters of the planet. We were shivering, sweating, and bleeding prey. We were soft-skinned creatures living in a world of ice, wolves, and infinite darkness. To survive the winter, you didn't just need food, you needed a miracle every single morning. Let's travel back to the Upper Paleolithic. The temperature is plummeting. The last ice age is in full swing. Ice sheets 2 miles thick are grinding across North America and Europe. The sun is a pale, distant ghost. Your existence depends entirely on your ability to outthink the elements. If you fail, you don't just get cold, you disappear. The first problem was the fire. Today, you turn a dial and your house is warm. Back then, fire was a living pet you had to feed every second of every day. If your fire went out, your society collapsed. Without flame, there was no way to thaw frozen meat. Without heat, the human body loses its ability to digest fats. Without that high-calorie fuel, your organs begin to shut down within 48 hours. Early humans carried fire like a holy relic. They used embers wrapped in moss and leather pouches. They didn't just use fire for warmth. They used it to survive the psychological terror of the night. In the pitch-black winter, predators like cave lions and giant hyenas roamed the permafrost. Fire was the only wall between you and the jaws of a creature that viewed you as a snack. Then there was the clothing. You didn't buy a parka at a store. You had to kill, skin, and scrape a hide using a sharpened flint tool. One wrong cut in the leather meant a gap where the wind could sneak in. A gap in your clothing in sub-zero weather is a death sentence. Archaeologists have found bone needles dating back 40,000 years. These were the most important pieces of technology in human history. With a needle, you could tailor layers. Air trapped between layers of fur is a better insulator than any modern synthetic fabric. But staying warm was only half the battle. You had to eat. In the middle of January, the plants were dead. The berries were gone. Everything was buried under 5 feet of hard-packed snow. This is when the brutality really began. Our ancestors became master scavengers. They followed the migration patterns of mammoths and reindeer with religious precision. They didn't just hunt. They practiced what anthropologists call persistence hunting. They would jog after an animal for hours, sometimes days, under the blistering winter sun, until the creature literally collapsed from exhaustion. They tracked blood trails across miles of frozen tundra. If you were a weak hunter, your family didn't eat that week. If you were a strong hunter, you ate the organs first, the heart, the liver, the brain. These are the most calorie-dense parts of an animal. Modern humans crave sugar. Ancient humans craved grease. They needed animal fat to keep their body temperature up. They would break open long bones with rocks to suck out the marrow, which is essentially pure energy. They turned every single part of the animal into a resource. The intestines became cords. The stomach became a water bag. The bones became needles and scrapers. Waste was a luxury nobody could afford. The mental toll of the winter was arguably harder than the physical one. Imagine living in a cave for 4 months of total darkness. The isolation was absolute. You were trapped with the same 10 people for months on end. If someone got sick, there were no hospitals. If someone got hurt, you didn't have antibiotics. A simple infected scrape on your finger could turn septic and kill you in a week. This led to the creation of the first social contracts. Survival required intense cooperation. If you were greedy, you were exiled. If you were exiled, you were dead within 24 hours. This is where the origins of morality likely began. We learned to share because sharing was the only way to ensure the group survived the lean months. We developed rituals, storytelling, and cave paintings during these dark winters. They weren't just art, they were psychological lifelines. They were ways to transmit knowledge, maintain morale, and pray for the spring to return. By 20,000 years ago, we see the rise of more permanent structures. Some groups began building huts made from mammoth bones. They would drag the massive, heavy skulls and tusks of dead mammoths to build a frame, then drape hides over the top. These weren't just tents. They were the first houses. They were climate-controlled environments created in the middle of a wasteland. But even with better gear and better shelter, Death was always standing at the door. We know this because of the archaeological evidence found in frozen graves. We find the skeletons of children who starved when the food stores ran out. We find the remains of elderly people who were left behind because they couldn't keep up during a migration. The harshness of the environment stripped away the polite veneers of humanity. Think about the sheer amount of luck required to exist right now. Your ancestors were the winners of a brutal lottery. Every single one of them managed to stay alive through winters that would make a modern man freeze to death in minutes. They fought off wolves with nothing but sharpened sticks. They burned their own fat to keep their brains functioning. They sang songs in the dark to stay sane while the temperature dropped to -40. We aren't just survivors of history. We are the descendants of the most resilient, clever, and ruthless hunters who ever walked this earth. Every time you complain about a cold morning, remember that your great-great-grandparents 300 times removed were skinning a reindeer in a blizzard just to keep their children breathing for one more night. The winter forced us to innovate. It forced us to become engineers of our own environment. It pushed us to create language, complex tools, and social structures. We didn't just survive the winter, we thrived because of it. It shaped our brains to solve problems under pressure. It sharpened our senses to spot the slightest change in the wind. But as the ice melted and the world warmed, something else happened. We forgot. We replaced the visceral fear of the freeze with the comfort of climate control. We stopped paying attention to the migration of herds and the movement of the stars. We lost the connection to the cycle of the seasons that defined us for millions of years. Perhaps that is the true danger of our modern comfort. We have eliminated the winter, but in doing so, we have lost the edge that made us human. When you look at the history of our species, you see a story of struggle against impossible odds. You see the cold as a crucible that forged our intelligence. Are we still the same people who could survive an ice age with nothing but a bone needle and a fire drill? Or have we become so detached from our origins that we would vanish the moment the grid went down? The cold is still there, waiting. It never really went away. It just waits for the day we stop being as clever as those who came before us. Survival is not a static state. It is an active, constant process of adaptation. Those who thrived in the past weren't the strongest. They weren't the fastest. They were the ones who could endure the most and learn the quickest. They were the ones who understood that the only thing standing between them and the ice was their own capacity for change. As you reflect on their journey, consider what you are doing with the safety you have been granted. Are you using your time to solve the problems of your age, or are you just waiting for the next long winter to arrive? History isn't just a record of what happened, it is a warning of what can return. If we ever lose the grit that carried our ancestors through the darkness, we might find that the cold is much closer than we think. What will you do when the warmth runs out?